All right, welcome in to another episode of Buzz Beat. What's going on, everyone? Happy New Year, happy 2025. Best of luck to you and your family with all of the resolutions ahead here the next 365 days. And we appreciate you joining us here for another episode of Buzz Beat today. For those joining us live or for those who will be catching this later in the week on their various podcasting formats. I'm Brian Geistinger. Today I will be joined by my guy Darian. Richie Randall is on the ones and twos producing. Today we are going to chat about the progress of Charlotte Hornets coach, first-year head coach Charles Lee. What's he doing right? What can he improve? What's out of his control? Before we get to that, Darian, Happy New Year to you and your family. How you doing, man?
Thank you. Happy New Year to you and your family as well. And I'm doing great. I mean, New Year, hoping for the best for this team. Obviously, we'll get into that. That may not be till next basketball year, but still technically happens this year. So, there's something to look forward
to. Did you make it to midnight last night?
Yes, I made it to midnight. I think I made it like 30 minutes past midnight, and I was like, all right, well.
Well done. That counts. Look, I made it to midnight. I had a glass of champagne in my hand, so I'm feeling may not have made it too much longer than that, but I'm feeling pretty good about that. In the words of LaMelo Ball, New Year, same me though. So let's talk about those same Charlotte Hornets. Here are some of the fundamentals with the team as we sort of like dig in on Coach Lee, the Charlotte Hornets, at this point, I can't even say it's been an up and down season. It's been mostly just down after some friskiness the first few weeks of the year. But the Hornets 7-35, so 40% of the way through the season here, 7 wins, offensive rating of 28th, a little over 100 points per 100 possessions, effective shooting just under 51% there, also 28th in the NBA. Turnover rate a little over 16%. It's bottom 5 or 6 in the NBA. One of the numbers that does stick out as a positive is an offensive rebound rate of 27.6%. And that number is interesting because despite the fact that the Hornets are really crashing the offensive glass, they have been a good defensive transition team this season too. And they've limited the amount of this season of Charlotte opponents, just 15.3% of their possessions have come in transition. So the Hornets have done a nice job hitting the offensive glass and not getting crushed on the other side of the court in transition defense. And that overall has allowed them to prop up to a team that's actually out above the bottom 10 in terms of defensive rating. They currently are 18th in the NBA with a defensive rating of 115 points for 100 possessions, defensive rebound rate of just under 76%, it's 12th in the NBA, a block percentage of only 5.5%. Of course, the real one, elite shot blocker on the roster, Mark Williams, he just got back a few weeks ago and really only, I guess, this week, right? He sort of had the minutes restriction come off. And he played very well in the game against Charlotte. But Darian, before we sort of get into some other parts of the state of the roster, do any of those numbers jump out to you as encouraging or worrisome at this point of the year? I think you're muted, my man.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but
all good.
I like the idea that you said about the transition defense. That's a sign to me of a team that tries. So I think that's beneficial. That's something that we need, and I know trying is something so small that we ask NBA players to do, but it has been a problem here in Charlotte. So I did like that. Mark Williams being able to help with the blocks, I know that's going to come around nicely. And I noticed also that for rebounding, we're like top 5. So that also was something that rebounding is going to, that's a good foundation to build off of to win games. There's obviously a lot of things we got to work on, but it sounds like we're getting better at these small, minuscule hustle stats, and that's what sticks out best to me is just being able to continue to develop those hustle stats. Which, like I said, that's something that is small, but we really have struggled with in the past. So to see that kind of take a turn, I think that's hopefully a good sign. Oh, I think this is how you're muted.
I've had a few different technical difficulties here. I've had to change out headphones here. I got new headphones for holidays, and they're just still getting adjusted to them. So I've thrown back on the old ones here, and it seems to have hopefully cut down on some of the feedback. I apologize for that. I think one of the big trends, observing the roster so thus far has been the injuries too, right? I mean, the team's currently without LaMelo Ball, currently Brandon Miller. LaMelo Ball did not play in the game against Chicago the other night, the most recent outing. Trey Mann has now missed, I believe, 17 games on the season. Grant Williams has missed 16 games. And you're talking about those. I mean, those are the four most important playmakers on the roster. Yeah, I think for my money, LaMelo, obviously, but certainly Brandon, Trey, and Grant, his front court passing, his front court playmaking. And I just think it's made sort of like creating half court offense reliably. It's made it tough. And other guys have missed time. Cody Martin's missed time. Miles Bridges missed time. These are other like important players for the Hornets. But I don't think it means that Charlotte is like without structure in the half court, or is without like a system. And that's actually one of the things I do kind of want to like touch on, and from sort of like acknowledging and giving some praise to Charles Lee. Like, I do actually think that, to me, Charlotte's offense is not does not like lack structure. We've talked about it at points this season, but they're doing a lot of playing their center on the wing. So you're getting to see Mark Williams sort of play in that role when they get to these 5-out looks. But at times it's been Richards, it's been Gibson, it's been Diabate, it was Grant Williams when he was able to play some small ball 5 for them as well this season. What that's done is it's helped open up the floor. It's created, I think, the system that allows the Hornets to be good at crashing the glass, but also being able to have numbers back for the transition defense, which we touched on a few minutes ago. And I would also say too, like the way they've been able to, within that structure, like diagram and sequence their plays. Like they run a lot of double drag pick and roll, but if they don't get into that, then one of the off-ball guards can come off of a flare screen from the 5, and then they can flow into something out of that. They can initiate with the ball out of the middle, and you see them running a lot of those like 5-out down screen actions, for Miller or Miles Bridges or LaMelo Ball when he's out there, Trey Mann when he was available early in the season. I don't think it's like a fluke that guys like LaMelo Ball and Trey Mann were having like career years, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they were healthy and were able to do damage in the system. I think it's helped open up the paint. I think it's given them some good looks. I think it's helped them sort of disguise some of their things. So I really give, and that's new, like that is new for the Hornets this season. And that's, I think there are, if you look around at college hoops and elsewhere in the NBA, there are other teams that are starting to implement that sort of structure that's come from either, Quinn Snyder or from Joe Mazzulla in Boston. But Charles Lee bringing that here has been, I think it's been a positive. And I genuinely think if you had Charlotte, which is better injury, health, and good fortune this season, I don't think this was a playoff team. I never thought they were. But I think they would have been they think they would have been like a pretty fun offensive team. And I don't think they would have been bottom 3 in efficiency either. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Darian, on the offense and sort of the impact that some of the injuries have had in terms of, I think really lowering the ceiling for them on that side of the floor.
Yeah, I think that overall, I mean, even without injury, I don't see where this roster is able to handle this kind of system. Like you mentioned, I mean, it's really only beneficial for maybe three of the players: Trey Mann, Brandon Miller, LaMelo, which is fine. I mean, considering coming into the season, we thought that those kind of were going to be the three guys that, whenever this team is good, we don't know when that would be, but whenever this team was a playoff team, a good team, those are kind of the three guys you would like to see on that roster. Now, now in the news with Trey Mann, the longer he sits out, the more speculation comes of if he's going to be on the team past the deadline. But we'll worry about that when we get there.
I just can't see him. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, you're fine.
I mean, you don't. I don't think he's getting moved. I mean, he's hurt right now. To me, that really lowers especially with the deadline not that far out. Like, I don't think he's getting moved. I mean, I think the Hornets I think the conversation that we're going to be having with Trey Mann is going to be what does the market look like in restricted free agency for him?
So my opinion on that is very, very similar. Like, I think that I almost feel as though they have something in place, and it's just, they don't want to risk any injury. They just want to get through the season. There's no reason for it to push him out there with a 7-25 team or whatever our record is. So we're going to, have him rest or whatever, however you want to put it. But, I think that I would hope that there's a plan to go with him moving forward. But yeah, with the just the system, I just think that it's going to take some time to get. Once we get the players, we'll be able to judge it a lot better. I know that there are some things that Coach Lee does that is kind of like his early rotations, as far as like who he was putting on the court and how long they were on the court. It was a little weird, and it's still weird, but now it's more so for injury than anything else. So it's just really, really hard to judge. I mean, of course, there's things that I love that Coach Lee does. I love that he's hard on the players, everyone, including LaMelo, all the way down. He seems as though he coaches everybody the same. Definitely, I think he's a little harder on LaMelo, or maybe hard is not the right word, but I think he's a little more closer to LaMelo. Like, every time out, he's running to LaMelo. This is what I think that's the relationship you want to see. It seems as though LaMelo's receptive of that, which is all good signs. So I think it's just going to take some time. I definitely I understand why some people are upset, because to an extent, I felt this way at one point where it is like, okay, Cody Martin can't shoot. Meaches can't shoot. Why Tashawn Salon cannot shoot yet? Why are we chucking up threes? But also you have to think about, I don't think that this system is for them. Like, it's not, they're not guys that are in the idea of what this team is going to become. I think that the thing is, you don't want to hold back LaMelo, Brandon, enter whoever else here for the sake of guys who may not be on here at the beginning of next year. So looking at it from that lens, and I can't even say if that's right or wrong, but looking at it from that lens, it just changed my perspective. I mean, and also, once you're like, the players are just not good enough. So even if he did change it to them, what would that get you? An extra game or two? And what, at the end of the day, what does that matter? But yeah, I see a lot of good things. I like about Coach Lee. I like how experimental he is.
Yes.
Also with the lineups, even though I did think they were weird, there were times where it worked, and I think that's what they say, right? If it works, you're a genius. If you don't, you're a mad guy. You're a madman. So it does fall into that a little bit, but I think that with this roster the way it is, where we're at, we don't even know. We're not really too much into at least our version of rumors yet, so we don't even know who's going where. Considering all that, I think that he's done a pretty good job.
Yeah,
his first year, so there's a lot of things to look at and say, "Oh, I wish that was better," but it's his first year.
Yeah.
But I definitely get both sides of it. I'm just more so. I'm a little more lenient. I understand our roster. If we were the Lakers, and then it's a little different because timetable was a lot different. Our timetable, I think a lot of people knew where we were going to be, but I think a lot of other fans were just very hopeful, and I get the hope, but I think it was like some of us had to look in the mirror and just be like, okay, this team's just not good enough. And those of us who did that are like, oh well, I think we're good. I think we're fine where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, to me, they were coming into the season with one of the, despite, sort of how I feel about guys like LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, as young, rising talents in the NBA with a roster that just wasn't like that good and had like injury reasons to be like concerned about both its floor and its ceiling, and so its consistency and the injuries too. You're coming into the season, Mark Williams, the guy who is your center of the future. I think has been a positive in recent weeks for them, but with him, not healthy, not ready to play. And again, he's back now and he looks good, but just this was a team that had a pretty low ceiling to begin with, barring like LaMelo playing 82 games and, Brandon making some huge jump. And, maybe there's a conversation to have around Miller at a later date. I mean, I think he's been like pretty good this year. But obviously like the rim finishing, that kind of creation stuff has not been amazing. Again, sort of like not the best ecosystem this season. Obviously he's missed time. He's only played in 23 games. In general, the team has been really hit hard by injuries. No one has played every game so far this season. I would also highlight, like we did the one episode a few weeks ago after Grant Williams was hurt, and we talked about how much of a huge blow that was going to be. I think anyone who covers the team or watches them or keeps up as a fan, whatever, you had to know sort of like the outsized impact that a guy like Grant was having from a defensive versatility standpoint, a lineup standpoint, what he does as a passer in the high post, what he does as a handoff hub in the high post, what he does as a screener, his ability to pick and pop. Like we talked about it after that. There was no one this team really had that could replicate that combination of defensive versatility, defensive impact, shooting and passing in the front court room. They just didn't have anyone like that. Bridges can give you some of the scoring, but he doesn't have the defensive impact. I don't think he has the sort of like sturdiness as a screener that Grant has to just to sort of like help get guys open. And then obviously just defensively, Grant is sort of like on another level than a guy like Bridges. So like, yeah, with if they're 1-15 in games without Grant Williams, right? It's like, I mean, it's not. I don't think they would be that much better in that stretch if Grant were back and playing. But like, it certainly wouldn't be quite that bad. I think Grant is like that important to them in terms of like, again, what he does to help open up things in the half court offense and just what he means from a versatility standpoint and how that translates to like late game offense too. He's a guy that this team has on the court, during leverage minutes, and to not have him is brutal. And at the time, we also mentioned this, like they were about to get Mark Williams and Nick Richards back, and like those guys have come back, and I'd like to talk some about Mark with you and sort of like how that relates to Coach Lee. But like, even knowing that those guys were going to come back and that was going to at least like solidify the center rotation, it wasn't going to replace what they were losing with Grant. Like there was no one on the roster that could like make up for it fully. You could sort of try to recreate parts of it with Cody Martin or Miles Bridges or whatever, but like it just wasn't going to be the same thing. And they no surprise, they miss him a lot. I think for me, ultimately, like I didn't expect this team to make the playoffs for a bunch of different reasons, mostly because even if they overperformed expectations the first half of the season, I figured they were going to do whatever it took to sort of like make sure they still ended up in the lottery and not, conveying the first round pick to San Antonio, and sort of like which would also sort of like offset some of the work that they had done at the deadline last year, getting extra picks coming in the door in the future from Miami and in Dallas. So, but the injuries are the thing to me that has just totally short-circuited everything, because I think this team was going to still be like watchable and competitive, and they were on certain nights going to be a pain for some of the best teams in the league, because LaMelo and Brand, they're going to take a ton of threes, and those two guys, Miller and LaMelo, would just get hot. And if both those guys are rolling, outside of like the Celtics or the Thunder, they can take any team and throw them over the top rope. When you've got two 6'7", 6'9" guys, floating around and making a bunch of threes and, getting downhill and what that opens up. But they just lost out on so much playmaking when they don't have LaMelo and Trey Mann. I mean, Mann was so important for them. Their win-loss record without Trey is really, really rough this season. He was the one guy that could come off the bench and give them playmaking juice in that capacity, and could also be on the court at the end of games with LaMelo. And like Darian, you and I, we talked about this back in probably November, just how basically, Vasa Micic was almost unplayable the first month of the season. He's starting for them now. Like they absolutely need this guy to be like a creator for them. It just goes to show you like there was like maybe enough playmaking juice on this lineup to build a like middle of the pack, functional, fun to watch NBA offense. But you take one of those guys off there and all of a sudden it starts to get like thin quickly. You take three or four of those guys off there, and all of a sudden, like you're running the offense through Miles Bridges and Vasa Micic pick and roll, or Seth Curry pick and roll, like he got going, the other night against Chicago. And like those are guys that like on most NBA teams, like are not in the rotation or not even like, viable. So I think it just goes to show like the injuries have really, really, really damaged the team. And like Richie and I were texting about this the other day, like it's easiest to point the finger at the coach. And I think that's one of the reasons why Charles Lee has caught a lot of flack. Do you have any thoughts on sort of what I was just running through there?
Yeah, I mean, just very similar to what you said. Like the playmaking on here was already like slim to none. I mean, I think I don't know of everyone, but I know there was a few fans, including myself, that still felt maybe we need another guard just in case. You never know, because as you said, once one gets injured, now we're seeing KJ Simpson run point guard, Nick Smith Jr. run point guard, and those are things that we obviously don't want to see if we're trying to at least be the fun team that are in these games and are making it competitive. So guard and big are the two things that we've still, even fully healthy, I think a lot of fans realize that we need somebody else, and for big, for center, luckily we got Diabate, but even then they're not the same player, but they're all the same mold between Mark, Nick, and Diabate. So we're like, we just need someone a little different. Like I remember during the offseason, I was thinking about maybe possibly looking into Jalen Smith before he went to Chicago. It's not like he's some superstar, but at least he's a threat to stretch the floor, allows you to do a little more. And then just with the guard rotation with Micic, it wasn't that I actually came into the season before he was unplayable, thinking Micic could be a really good tandem, especially with LaMelo on the floor, both of them at the same time.
He was good last season, and he was good in the Olympics for Serbia. Like he's a good player. I mean,
I don't think you can fall off in 2 months.
Yeah, I think
forget how to play basketball.
I think he's been better in recent weeks with more playing time, but like he was pretty rough against. He had a horrible shooting night against Chicago.
Like 0 for 7 or 9 or something like that.
But like they're having to rely on like KJ Simpson and Isaiah Wong.
I forgot Isaiah Wong. Yeah,
it's like that's a pretty, and like those guys are like interesting young guards, smaller young guards. But and I like some of the stuff KJ's done, but it'd be tough for even a guy like Eric Spoelstra, to build like a functional offense. It would be really difficult, especially when those guys are like having to play like real minutes and like run real offense for you. It's
right,
and then it's tough.
And I really think of Isaiah Wong only because KJ Simpson was drafted by us, but I really think of Isaiah Wong where you're trying to really prove yourself and you're being tossed in this situation where they're asking you to do something that's not really your game. Your teammates around you, and it's not like you're in a place to succeed. New coach, new it's just a tough situation. It makes you feel for guys like that just because, Diabate, luckily he was just asked, can you get us rebounds? And then he, shot with true color. So I think that's fine. But like guys like Isaiah Wong are guys that's like, that's just unfortunate that you're being asked to perform in a rotation like this. And then it hurts the rest of the team. Like guys like Cody Martin, where it feels as though he's on the in and out. Some people want him gone. Some people want him here. And I've always thought Cody is only as good as the people around him. I don't think he could be that good with Isaiah Wong as his point guard, and that's not Isaiah Wong's fault. So it's just like you said, a lot of people are just going to go to the coach. But in this situation, I mean, I get it because some people feel like somebody needs to be blamed, and it doesn't. You can't just trade a player off, out of thin air. But I don't think all blame deserves to go on the coach. I mean, like there's some things you can say for sure, but I don't think all the blame deserves to go there.
Yeah, and if I were to continue to sort of like toss another praise onto the pile here for Charles Lee. I mean, creating the number 18 defense out of this roster is not nothing. Like thinking about what their defensive personnel is, I mean, I guess maybe with Martin and Green have been, relatively healthy, and those guys have played a lot this season, and they're not like amazing wing defenders, but they at least try hard and can do some stuff on that side of the court. But like, I mean, they've been going into, a lot of these games with, think about what the center rotation has been, or having to play a guy like Miles Bridges, big minutes, who's not a great defender, LaMelo Ball, big minutes, who's not a great defender, and still to eke out a team that's sort of in the middle of the pack defensively. I think that says something on that side of the court. You saw this also in the Chicago game. It's been something the Hornets have been doing since preseason. This is where I'm sort of bringing it back to Charles Lee and his defensive system. They're cross-matching a lot of the 4 and the 5. We've talked about it plenty this year, but they're taking Bridges and they're putting him on Vucevic, and they're taking Mark Williams, and they started with him on Patrick Williams. And then Patrick Williams, of course, hits 4 threes in the first half or whatever. So then they put Mark Williams on Josh Giddey. But it's fun to see Mark play that roaming defensive role, and I kind of want to see more of it. I like them trying that. You taking your 4 and having the more mobile, switchable player be able to defend the pick and pop actions with a guy like Vucevic, or guard those guys in space. Charlotte really doesn't have like the personnel to like really excel at that at that spot. Maybe there's like a couple of years from now, if Salon, ever
he would be
develops.
perfect for
yeah. And I'd actually kind of like to talk about him a little bit at some point on this pod too. Kind of when we get more towards my like some other thoughts about Lee and some of the young guys on the roster. But Mark Williams is playing really nice basketball right now, and it's awesome to see how like he was super mobile in the Chicago game. And I like the fact that he's also been empowered to like operate a bit as like a passer and like a hub at times for them. He's only played 183 minutes so far this season, just 10 games, 7 starts, but over 4 assists per 36 minutes this season, over, almost over 5.5 assists per 100 possessions. That's way above, 22% assist rate this year. Again, small sample. Like, let's see how it like stabilizes and changes throughout the year. But like, to me, that was something we talked about often on this pod over the last 3 years. Like, what was the next step of offensive growth for Mark Williams, right? Like, could he become a passer? I think some people were always hopeful that maybe he could shoot the occasional pick and pop 3 or whatever. To me, it was this. It was like, can he do stuff on the short roll? Can he be a hub for you at the elbow? And we're not there. Like, I'm not like stamping him as that yet, but I think there's been some encouraging stuff. And if you're thinking about how like the trio of LaMelo, Brandon Miller, Mark Williams fit together long term, Williams is a guy that can help get those guys open. Obviously in the pick and roll with LaMelo, setting down screens for Brandon, when they're trying to get him going off movement. But what he can also do as a handoff guy, what those guys can do working off the ball together with Mark operating in the high post potentially, it just opens up some other possibilities that I like really, I'd considered, but really wasn't sure like how realistic they were. And I'm feeling encouraged by what I've seen so far. So I know we're really trying to focus this more on Charles Lee, but to do so, Darian, I'll pose this question to you. What have you liked from sort of like the development path and the role that the new coaching staff has carved out for Mark Williams in the first 10 games that he's played so far this year.
I like that. I feel as though they almost took exactly what was questioned about him and are already highlighting it as far as his mobility. Because I remember last year when he did play, I want to say we played the Wizards twice in his time he played last year, and we kept getting smoked by the 5 out. I know we did one particular because Gallinari went crazy, but I can't remember if it was twice. But I like that, like you said, they went ahead and tried to, because he can do it. It's just a matter of he's got to have the right matchup. Why did Patrick Williams all of a sudden become Reggie Miller? I think that's the nature of the Hornets, because I think Torrey Craig also was just hitting shots that he normally doesn't hit, at least this season. So I can't really fault Mark Williams for that. But I think that you're going to get some times where it doesn't look pretty. But as we were mentioning earlier with the system in general, as far as offensively with LaMelo and Brandon, I don't know if I could say that Charles Lee's system benefits Mark Williams the way it benefits them, but I will say he can excel in it. And I feel like a big of his archetype, I think that's what you want. I don't think you really are building it for him. I think you just want to make sure he can excel. And I think that he's going to be able to. I like that they're using Mark Williams as more than just, we're just going to get you to as a lob threat. We're just going to use you as a pick and roll. No, I like the different ways they're able to use him. And I think that he's also still able to do what made him, a lottery pick, or I always get it mixed up if the 15 is lottery or not, but a lottery pick from Duke like that. Those are the things, the way his ability to block shots, his length, like he's still able to use all these things while adding these other parts of his game. I think coming out of Duke, he was an underrated passer. Not to an extent that usually when you use underrated passer, they're a lot better than maybe what Mark Williams is. But I still think that a lot of people didn't think like they just thought he was a regular traditional big. But I felt as though there was a little more there, and I'm glad that we're able to see it. And I am liking that he's able to play more with these other players, because I know that a lot of times with a big Dak Young, you get concerned of whether or not how they're going to play with these other players when he doesn't have his star guard, or even not even a star guard, but just a competent playmaker. And I think he's doing well offensively. But yeah, overall, I like how they're using Mark Williams specifically defensively, and that's really what that's the whole point of this whole marriage, is having Mark Williams kind of be our defensive anchor. I think he can do it. I mean, like you said, his ability to roam, he's nimble and agile enough to move around. I do like that. Sometimes if a guard's going downhill trying to attack the rim, he's able to, quickly come off the screener and then meet them at the rim. Whether he blocks it or alters the shot, either way, I mean, it's fine. I just like how versatile he's able to show. I think that's going to be very impactful. We definitely obviously need guys like Grant. It's not to say Marcus is going to be able to do that. He physically can't, but to have someone of his size, that
I'd like to see them play together too. I want to see them play together. Like I want Grant in part because Grant plays a lot of defensive 5, but like in this sort of like cross-matching role, I'd like to see Grant as like essentially like the offensive 4, but guarding the opposing 5, so he gets to switch or play drop coverage. And then you've got Mark on the backside, putting out fires, disrupting stuff at the rim, being a menace. Like that's the thing that really, and I mean, those guys didn't play at all together this season. Like it sucks. They didn't play together at all last year either. Like if they play together, it will be at some point like halfway through next season.
Yeah, because there's talk that Grant won't come back till maybe even All-Star break of next year.
I know, possibly. And so like it's man, I feel really bad for him. That's a pretty serious injuries that he suffered. But like that would look really interesting, would it not? Like in those two guys together, like you can see the vision. And then all of a sudden, if you've got two guys in the front court that can give you a little bit of passing, neither one of those guys is like, Jokic or Sengun or whatever, but like Grant can obviously do it. And I think he's been very beneficial, especially with Brandon at the end of last season, once Grant came from Dallas, like really good at helping Miller get looks coming off of handoffs, split cuts, pin downs, And then all of a sudden, if you have a guy like Mark who can do a little bit of that too, it just adds to it. You can really help open up the floor, open up motion, open up movement for some of your best young players
Mhm.
too. And again, the defense has been a little bit better in recent weeks too, and that coincides with Mark coming back. He's the one guy that can really like make a difference at the rim defensively that they have.
Yeah.
Like he's the Richards can block a shot. Diabate can as well, but Mark is different. I mean, he just is. Like it's the thing that like really 9'9", standing reach with that mobility and those like defensive instincts that he has. It's pretty serious. So I've liked what they've tried with Mark this season. I've been encouraged by it. The Chicago game was like eye-opening to me because I thought he
Mhm.
played awesome in that game. And I thought he was like clearly Charlotte's best. Like I know Bridges like was doing stuff for them offensively, but like I thought he was like clearly the Hornets' best player
Yeah.
in that game. And there was even one play, I actually clipped it and tweeted it out on the morning of New Year's Eve after the game. But the Hornets run a little horns out action that they run 1,000 times per game. Usually they flow into like a slot ball screen with Miller or with Bridges. They've done this a million times. But if they don't throw it to the guard who's popped out, they throw it to the 5 at the elbow. And then the next progression off of that is a split cut between the guard who popped out and the point guard who initiated the set.
Mhm.
So, they throw it to Williams at the elbow. They run a little split cut off that. I can't remember who was cutting to the rim. May have been Green. Um, he gets fouled on the way to the rim. So there's no assist there for Mark Williams,
Right.
but for him to be able to catch in the high post, for them to be able to run an action off of that, that's not just Mark Williams catching an offensive rebound and pitching it back out, right? There's a little bit of like reading a coverage,
Mhm.
up, throw up, passing placement. Again, like let's take it like a game at a time with him and with these kinds of things because it's all pretty new and the sample is small, but very encouraging at this point this season. And like in a year that's been pretty tough, like I'm gonna kind of hang my hat on that with Big Mark. So all right, before we go ahead and sort of like wrap up here, one other thing to maybe key in on because I think if I don't want to speak for you here, Darian, but
Mhm.
I think both of us have sort of been placing most of the blame for the team being 7-25 and as so woeful on offense, especially in the half court offense. We've put a lot of that on the fact that it's young team that was coming into the season with a pretty low ceiling, then has just been crushed by injuries to really key players. I mean, no one's been spared, but like their best and most important offensive players. Like I think we agree on that, and so in essence, we're sort of coming in defense of Charles Lee, and I think we've even sort of pointed out some of the more encouraging things and talked to the structure, the system, how he's helped a guy like Mark Williams, etc. But do you have any? Maybe you hinted on it in terms of like the rotation. So if you want
Mhm.
to touch on that a little bit more, go for it. Maybe you have something else, but I'd be curious to know if you have maybe one aspect um, in terms of Charles Lee, what you've seen so far that has you worried, has you a little skeptical. What do you think about that?
I will say the lineups, even though I do think they have improved, I will say that he'll have, and I think it's because he's trying stuff. And I can honestly say that maybe I'm a little more lax about it now because we're 7-25. But when we were 7-10 and hoping Mark was around the corner, it was a little frustrating. But I get that he was trying to experiment, and I'm going to chalk it up as he knew what's going on as far as who's playing, who's not playing, what they're really trying to accomplish this season. As opposed to me, I very much was like, they're not going to make the playoffs. But then they were at the early beginning of the season. It was like, oh, once we get healthy, we can at least just be in the fight. That's kind of all I was willing to accept. And then it kind of just fell off a cliff from there. So his rotations now, I don't think it really matters, but I do like that. He's just willing to try anything. Now, I will say that there's things like Diabate, like that's a big one where he
Yeah.
just doesn't
Yeah.
play anymore, and I don't think that makes any sense. There were times where even now, yeah, and I know once again I said I'm congratulating him or I'm praising him for experimenting, but at the same time, I feel as though maybe he needs to be a little more intentional with his experimentations. Because, like I said, Diabate, there's no reason Diabate should not be playing. There's times where I felt as though he'll have like a lineup of like Michish, Tajon, Cody, Nick. Like it's just out there way too long, and it's just like, okay, I get that. We're trying. You're trying new stuff, but I can tell you that that's not going to give you the result you want. And maybe it's because he's trying to rest other players. Who knows? So they can come back. But there's just those are the type of things that I get worrisome about. I do think at the beginning we haven't really seen it lately because Brandon Miller has been out and Melo too. But there will be times where they're hot. I mean, they are hitting on all cylinders, and a dead ball will happen and he takes them out. And it's like, I get it. You want them for the last 4 minutes of the fourth quarter, but it just things like that. And we're not seeing much of that anymore because those guys aren't playing. We're missing, other people. So I really can't. It hasn't happened lately, but those are things that when we were, I would say we're probably a little more healthy now than we were then. But when those players were playing a little more consistently, those were the gripes I had. I obviously don't have as much anymore, but just because it's 2 games on, 2 games off for our key players. But yeah, the lineups are really where I just question it a little bit. Guys like KJ Simpson will be out there too long, like things like that. But overall, I do praise him for just being willing to do so, because you're not going to know what you have until you put it out there. That's one thing I'll put. I know we're not comparing the 2 coaches, but it's just because Cliff was our most recent coach. That's one thing I'll give Charles Lee is, for the most part, he is playing the younger guys. He's letting them go out there, letting them make mistakes. He's not pulling them after one mistake. So I do like that, though. I think our roster, because I'm one of those people that's like, okay, we're 7-25. Maybe Cody Martin shouldn't play as much and let some other guys play a little more. But I get it. Like I get our roster, the way it's currently constructed. We're not going to get more from those younger guys just because the older guys obviously had to play. But yeah, overall, I would say that it's gotten better. And there's some times where his rotations have been exceptional. Like I have no complaints. And there's other times it's like, come on, like you just coached a masterpiece this 2 games ago. Why are we? But he's trying to figure out stuff. So that's kind of where I'll leave that.
Yeah, the Diabate role thing was confusing. Once Richards and Williams got back, I could it made a little more sense. I feel bad for Musa because he played so well. I thought at times this season, but it's like you can't play all those guys together, or at least it's really hard to do so. So there is that, but so I think there are some legit lineup questions. I think some of the health and injuries have played a role in that as well. At some point this season, maybe this could be the next episode, but just sort of like this isn't like even necessarily like a Charles Lee or a huge knock on the franchise or whatever, but just like I'd like to know sort of like what the plan with Nick Smith is, what the plan with Tajon Salon is. I think, again, like I said earlier, I think Brandon's been good this season, not great. And the rim, interior finishing has been, hasn't been very good this season. I think that shouldn't be a surprise if you scouted Miller. You knew that was going to be sort of like a concern of his going into the NBA, but something to sort of like, I don't know. I kind of like to know, like, sort of like, I see the roadmap with Williams. I see the roadmap with Miller. Some of the other young guys, I'm a little bit more concerned on here. Would also like to mention we had a question from young Pablo in the chat. It said, "Who do you guys want to see the Hornets draft with their more than likely lottery pick in the upcoming draft?" Each personally, man, there's a lot of guys to choose from. Like it really honestly depends on where we fall, because there's
3 to 4 guys I like almost at every
Yeah,
draft.
I mean, if they get the number 1 pick, draft Cooper Flag. Do that. But
I
there's a
do want
lot
to
of
say something about that really quick. So I know there was like a report. I really wish I could remember who put it out, but they were saying that a lot of teams are starting to think that Cooper may not be the number 1 option everybody thought he would be. And there were Hornets fans saying, like, oh, well, I don't want him. And to me, I'm more so that's okay with me. I'm not with LaMelo, Brandon, Mark, and at this point Miles. Like I don't need Cooper Flag to be my team's number 1 option. So to have him as a 4th guy that can do all the things he can do, I will run
yeah,
to the podium to pick
yeah.
him up.
He
We don't need him. We don't need him to be a 1 option.
to
We need
me
him to do
the
exactly what he's doing now.
we can talk about this more later in the season. The discourse on him has been like predictably really stupid this season.
Yeah.
I think he's been awesome. And I think he's moved me more than most, if not any other prospect. I was already coming into the season with pretty high expectations. I'm saying this is someone I've seen him up close probably all but 2 games so far this season, at least for as far as Duke home games go. But a guy like Colin Murray Boyles at South Carolina looks like a guy that's best returner in the country. Is playing like a top 5 prospect. Plays, can probably play some small ball 5, but is more of a 4. So a guy that I really like that could also I think fit a need for Charlotte's roster and be a guy that could also fit nicely with Miller, with LaMelo. It'd be nice if the jumper needs to kind of come along for him, but he's been awesome so far this season. I love his quickness, his processing, the interior finishing. I think Thomas Sorber at Georgetown is another front court guy that's been sort of like an analytics darling, lots of steals, lots of blocks, like a really impressive front court defender prospect that has some skills offensively. Another guy that's probably had the biggest climb this season. But I mean, depending on where the Hornets draft, like if they end up with the number 2 pick and someone like Dylan Harper is there or Jeremiah Fears, I know those guys in theory, they project as future lead ball handlers, but and you've got LaMelo, but I'm just thinking best prospect available. And I do sort of trust that that's where the front office would be aiming for. But I really like Fears a lot. Super young, reclassed. The guy gets into the paint every time. Really good instincts defensively off the ball. Very promising young player at Oklahoma. Dylan Harper, I understand sort of like the athleticism and shooting concerns, but man, he gets into the paint. He's strong, gets downhill, creative, just a natural scorer who has excellent, A-level feel on both sides of the court. I like Derek Queen at Maryland. I think he's he and Kaman Malawach are probably battling for the top center in this draft. I don't think Queen's going to be like a good defensive center in the NBA, but I think he has the chance to be a very good offensive player. The Hornets also have Mark Williams. So, what do you do about that? Basically, I think there are going to be a lot of guys that are in the sort of like big forward role, even someone like Ace Bailey at Rutgers, who's really struggled, but has good off-ball shooting capabilities, defensively versatile. I mean, maybe he would be kind of a hilarious fit with guys like LaMelo and Brandon Miller. Yeah. It's just like the negative rim pressure team. But or even someone like VJ Edgecombe at Baylor. So said a lot of names here, but those are the guys that I'm paying attention to probably the most.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody you said. I know some people I like Trey Johnson too, even though I like the names you mentioned a lot more. But Trey Johnson, I think, is good. The guy from I always mess up his name, but the guy from BYU, I think he's pretty good. But it's just a matter of what the Hornets are looking for. I think this will be one of the few drafts, or maybe is it best prospect available, or is it like, if it's really close, do you go with the guy that's a little better fit? If you have 2 guys who you like them both a lot, do you go with the guy who you think, is slightly better? Do you go with the guy who may not quite be, if one's 1A, 1B, do you go 1B because he's a better fit? I don't know if that's where the Hornets are looking. I'm always best player available. I almost feel like that no matter where you are, unless you're just like the Warriors and you need a bench shooter, then why not get the guy that is electric from third? Like stuff like that maybe I can't say the Warriors anymore because they're not as good. I'm so used to saying that for the last 10
Yeah.
years, but
Yeah.
but yeah, it just depends. I'm all for best prospect available. Yeah, but there's a lot of guys in this class, almost one. How low can we fall? Like 8, 1 through 8 that I'm very comfortable with taking. So
Yeah.
it's just
I
a
mean,
matter of figuring out
that's
where we're drafted.
that's the flip side to these guys being I mean, that's the trade-off for them being so bad this year is that like
Yeah,
they're right in, I mean, they're a half game, away from Toronto for being, having being having a 14% chance of the number 1 pick. Like they're right there with like Toronto and Utah. Like they're all kind of bunched up. And obviously New Orleans and Washington are really like, really dragging things down at the bottom. But like the Hornets are, I mean, they're on pace to end up with a really good pick. And like that is probably not like what some were hoping heading into the season, but it's not a bad thing. It means they have a chance to potentially go out and get another franchise altering player. And heck, maybe that's Cooper Flagg. Like that would be something like that would be pretty serious for the Hornets, but that's a ways off. And we're going to end up doing scouting pods on all of these guys, I'm sure, throughout the season. And there's a lot of basketball still to be played the last few weeks. But Darian, Happy New Year to you, man, and to your family, to everyone who listened or will listen later this week. We really, really do appreciate everyone who tuned into this episode. If you enjoy what we do, please leave us a 5-star rating review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else where you listen to your episodes. We appreciate all the support, all the patience, and we look forward to another successful year. So again, Happy New Year to everyone. Good health, safety to everyone and their families, and go Hornets. We'll see.